The Vikings conquered oceans with cloth. We know them as warriors, but their true power was spun from wool and flax. This is the hidden story of Viking Age textile production, a craft that built their society, funded their explorations, and held mysteries we are only now beginning to understand. By the end of this journey, you will see the Viking world through the threads they left behind. How did a simple farmstead's daily labor produce sails capable of withstanding North Atlantic storms? Why were fragments of vibrant purple silk, a luxury from another world, buried in Scandinavian soil? The answers reveal a civilization far more complex than the legends suggest. What does it truly mean to be a master of your environment? A single Viking farmstead was a world in miniature, a self-sufficient engine whose primary fuel was fiber. At the heart of this operation was the northern European short-tailed sheep, a breed as rugged as the landscape. These animals did not produce one uniform fleece, but a layered coat with different textures, each destined for a specific purpose. The soft, fine undercoat was painstakingly combed out to be spun into thread for soft, warm undergarments. The long, coarse outer hairs, strong and resilient, were reserved for the tough yarn needed for sails and ropes, the very threads that would pull a ship across the sea. This was not a simple matter of shearing a sheep and getting wool. It was a sophisticated understanding of raw material, a pre-industrial form of material science practiced on a misty hillside. Alongside the sheep in the fields grew flax, the plant that would become linen. This was a crop that demanded immense patience and labor. From sowing the tiny blue flowers to the final product, every step was a race against rot and a test of skill. After harvest, the stalks were not simply dried, they were retted, soaked in a pond or stream for weeks to break down the woody core. The smell of this process was pungent, a sign of bacterial decay that was essential to unlocking the precious fibers within. Workers then broke the brittle stalks with a wooden blade, scutched them to remove the shards, and finally hackled them, dragging the fibers through a bed of iron nails to comb them into smooth, straight strands. This was a year's work, all for a single shirt. For the vast majority, wool and flax were the boundaries of their textile world, but other plants, like the stinging nettle, could be processed into a strong, linen-like thread, a testament to Viking ingenuity. And for a select few, those with vast wealth and far-reaching connections, there was another material entirely. Fragments of silk, some dyed a brilliant and costly purple, have been found in Viking graves. This was not a local product, but a global commodity, a whisper of trade routes that stretched all the way to Constantinople and beyond. The existence of this silk in the cold north tells a story of a society already deeply connected to the wider world, a story whose next chapter was written by the hands of its women. Within the quiet confines of a Viking home, the most important sound was not the clash of swords, but the steady, rhythmic hum of a spinning spindle. This simple tool, a drop spindle, was the engine of an empire, and its heart was a small, often beautifully crafted disc called a whorl. Acting as a flywheel, the whorl's weight and momentum gave the spindle the stability to twist fibers into strong, consistent thread. The choice of whorl was a deliberate act of engineering. A heavy whorl made of stone or dense clay would spin with more power, creating the thick, robust yarn needed for sails and outerwear. A lighter whorl, perhaps carved from bone or antler, produced a finer, more delicate thread for soft undergarments or a child's tunic. This was precision tooling on a miniature scale. For Viking women and girls, spinning was not an occasional chore but a constant companion. They would spin while walking, while talking, while tending to the fire, their hands perpetually in motion. The quality of the thread they produced was the absolute foundation for everything that followed. A poorly spun thread would weaken the entire cloth, a failure that could unravel the comfort and security of a family. Mastery of the spindle was therefore the first and most essential skill a girl learned, the thread from which her own fate and that of her community was woven. Once the thread was spun, its destiny was decided at the loom. This was not a small, portable device but a massive, vertical frame that leaned against the main wall of a longhouse, a permanent and dominant feature of the living space. Known as the warp-weighted loom, Its structure was both simple and brilliant. Vertical threads, the warp, hung down from a horizontal beam, and each bundle of threads was tied to a weight, usually a fist-sized lump of baked clay or a smooth stone. These weights kept the threads taut, creating the foundation upon which the entire cloth would be built. The weaver, almost always a woman, worked from the bottom upwards. She would separate the warped threads with a wooden sword to create a space called the shed, then pass a horizontal weft thread through this opening, beating it upwards with the sword to tighten the weave. Row by meticulous row, the fabric grew, a slow ascent of cloth. The size of this loom was not arbitrary. Its width, often around 2 meters, defined the maximum width of the cloth a household could produce. A wider loom meant wider cloth, which meant warmer cloaks and more efficient sail making. The length was limited only by the height of the loom and the stamina of the weaver. Therefore, the loom itself was a direct measure of a family's economic standing. A large loom producing vast lengths of dense woolen cloth, known as vadmal, was a clear sign of wealth and productivity. This cloth was so central to the Norse economy that it became a standardized form of currency, traded by the ell, a measure of length. The rhythmic clatter of the loom weights was the sound of commerce and survival, a daily creation of tangible value from simple thread. But how did these practical fabrics transform into objects of such striking beauty and complex meaning? The cloth emerging from the loom was far from a simple, uniform sheet. Viking weavers mastered techniques that transformed sturdy thread into sophisticated, patterned fabrics. The most common advanced method was the twill weave. Instead of the simple over-under pattern of a basic weave, twill involved passing the weft thread over 2 or more warp threads, then under 1 or 2, in a sequence that shifted with each row. This created a distinct diagonal ribbing across the fabric. A popular version was the 2-2 twill, where the weft went over 2 warp threads and then under 2. This diagonal structure made the resulting cloth remarkably strong, dense, and flexible. It could stretch and move with the wind, making it the absolute ideal material for the massive sails that powered Viking ships across the North Atlantic. For a sailor clinging to a yardarm in a gale, the integrity of that twill-woven sail was the difference between life and death. But the artistry did not stop at diagonal lines. Weavers with great skill and access to wealthier households created complex patterns like diamond, twills, and lozenges. These designs required a meticulous and sophisticated setup of the loom's warped threads, a time-consuming process that demonstrated a deep understanding of geometry and textile engineering. The weaver had to plan the entire pattern in advance, carefully controlling the sequence of raising and lowering specific warp threads to create these repeating, symmetrical shapes within the fabric itself. These were not just decorations. When archaeologists find fragments of diamond twill cloth, they are almost always in high-status graves, placed alongside swords and fine jewelry. This tells us that Vikings saw these intricate patterns as clear markers of identity and wealth. A chieftain's cloak, woven with a striking lozenge pattern, was a walking statement of power and connections. It proclaimed that his household could afford the immense labor of a master weaver, a person who could literally weave status into the very fibers of their clothing. The value is not just in the wool, but in the skilled hands and the time required to create such beauty. This drive for vibrant expression, however, demanded one more crucial ingredient, a splash of color drawn from the most unexpected places. The Viking world was a vibrant tapestry of color, a far cry from the muted browns and grays often imagined. To create these brilliant hues, they became master chemists of the natural world, transforming common plants into a rich and lasting palette. The deep, resonant blue that colored everything from tunics to sail trim came from the woad plant. Its leaves were harvested, crushed, and fermented in vats for weeks, a process that produced a pungent, almost foul-smelling sludge that miraculously yielded a beautiful blue dye. For fiery reds and warm oranges, they turned to the roots of the madder plant. These roots were dried, ground into a powder, and then simmered in great pots. The most vibrant and sought-after yellow came from the weld plant, a flowering weed that could produce shades from pale lemon to a bold, sunny gold, and Viking dyers were not limited to single colors. By dyeing wool first in weld for yellow and then over-dyeing it in a woad vat, they could create a spectrum of greens, from muted olive to a rich forest shade. This clever layering of dyes demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of color theory, centuries before it was formally defined, but creating the color was only half the battle. For these dyes to stick to the woolen fibers and resist fading through sun and rain, they needed a crucial helper, a substance called a mordant. The most effective mordant was alum, a mineral salt that acts as a chemical bridge, binding the dye pigment permanently to the protein in the wool. When a piece of wool was treated with alum before dyeing, the color would become fast and brilliant. The presence of alum in Scandinavia is a story in itself. While some could be gathered from certain local rocks, the best quality alum was often imported, traveling vast trade routes to reach the dyer's pot. Finding evidence of bright, alum-fixed colors like red and blue in an ordinary farmstead's textile remains tells archaeologists that this household was connected to wider trade networks. They had the means or the contacts to acquire these valuable substances. The colors a person wore were a direct reflection of their place in society. The earthy tones of browns and grays, achieved from undyed wool or simple tree bark, were the colors of everyday labor, but a cloak of madder red or a tunic trimmed with woad blue signaled something more: wealth and access to the dyer's art. The most exclusive color of all was a true, deep purple. While some purples could be approximated by mixing woad and madder, the most intense shades came from an entirely different source, one that connected the wearer to empires far beyond the northern seas. This was a luxury so rare and so expensive that its discovery in a grave is a sure sign of royalty or a chieftain of immense power. These vibrant threads reveal a society acutely aware of visual status, where your social standing was not just heard in your stories, but seen in the very colors you wore each day. And for the most powerful among them, that visual statement extended to a material so exotic, it must have seemed like it was woven from moonlight and magic. Purple was the ultimate walking bank statement in the Viking world. To wear a garment of true, lasting purple was to broadcast power and connections that stretched to the very edges of the known world. While a dyer could mix woad blue and madder red to create a passable violet, the most coveted and durable purples came from a far more mysterious source: lichens. Certain species, like Acrolchia tartaria, which grows on northern rocks, could be harvested and fermented in ammonia, often derived from aged human urine, to produce a range of stunning and color-fast hues from deep crimson to a rich royal purple. This was not a simple process of tossing plants into a pot. It was a form of alchemy, requiring specific knowledge and patience. The resulting dye did not need a separate mordant like alum. It bonded directly and permanently with the wool, creating a color that would not fade. A cloak dyed with this lichen purple was a masterpiece of chemical engineering, its brilliance a testament to the dyer's secret arts. Finding even a small fragment of such fabric in a grave is a powerful signal to archaeologists. It speaks of a person who could command the labor for this intensive process, or who had the wealth to acquire the finished cloth through trade. In some cases, the most brilliant purples found in Scandinavia came from an even more distant and prestigious source: the legendary Tyrian purple of the Mediterranean, made from the mucus of sea snails. This was a luxury item so expensive that in the Roman Empire its use was restricted to the elite. A scrap of this silk, dyed with true Tyrian purple and buried in a Viking grave, is more than just fabric. It is a frozen moment of global connection. It tells us that a chieftain in Denmark or Norway was part of an exchange network, so vast it could deliver a treasure from the warm southern seas to the cold northern soil. His purple cloak was not just warm, it was a map of his influence, woven from threads of distant shores and silent trade agreements. This visual language of wealth, written in color and pattern, demanded a final, physical form, a garment that could carry all this meaning into the world and onto the decks of their greatest creations, the Viking ships. The final garment was not always woven on a great loom. For smaller, more personal items, Vikings employed a different craft, one that created a fabric so durable it could last for centuries. This was nail binding, a technique whose name means literally binding with a needle. It is an ancient method, a precursor to knitting that creates a thick, felt-like cloth. A craftsman, likely a woman in the home, would work with a single, sturdy needle, often made of bone or wood, and a short length of yarn. The process is a rhythmic dance of looping and pulling. The needle draws a new loop through an old one, locking them together in a dense, interlocking mesh. The result is a fabric that is incredibly strong, elastic, and most importantly, will not unravel if a single thread is cut. This was problem solving in its purest form, creating garments perfectly suited to a harsh climate. Archaeological finds across the Viking world are filled with the products of this craft. Socks and mittens recovered from sites are often made with nail binding. These were not decorative luxuries, but essential survival gear. A seamless, dense woolen sock would keep a warrior's feet warm and dry during a long winter, while mittens allowed for dexterity without sacrificing warmth. Caps made with this technique fit snugly to the head, providing insulation without the bulk of a woven hood. The genius of nail binding lies in its structure. Unlike a woven cloth that can fray, or an early form of knitting that can run, a nail-binded item is a single, unified piece of fabric. A small hole would not spell its doom. This resilient, almost indestructible quality made it the perfect technology for the items that took the most daily abuse. Each pair of socks was a small masterpiece of textile engineering, a knotless net that trapped heat and defied wear, stitch by patient stitch. Yet, for all its practicality, this same meticulous, hands-on approach was also applied to the most precious and delicate materials they possessed, transforming exotic fibers into objects of breathtaking artistry. The same patient hands that made socks for survival also produced breathtaking works of art for the elite. Embroidery transformed a simple woolen tunic or a sturdy cloak into a walking canvas of wealth. Using needles and threads dyed in the most precious colors, artisans stitched intricate patterns directly onto the finished cloth. A chieftain's cloak might be edged with a swirling beast, its body a spiral of red and blue wool, or a noblewoman's dress might feature a delicate vine of green leaves, each one a tiny, perfect stitch. The threads themselves told a story of access, for the most luxurious embroideries were not done in wool at all, but in silk. This imported thread, shimmering and strong, would catch the light in a way wool never could, making the design seem to move and breathe. These were not mere decorations, they were a form of heraldry, a silent language proclaiming the wearer's lineage and power to anyone who saw them. Yet for pure technical complexity, another craft reigned supreme. Tablet weaving was a form of magic performed with a handful of small, square cards, each one a tiny, programmable loom. Made from bone or wood, these tablets had holes punched near each corner. Threads were passed through the holes, and the entire deck of cards was held taut in the weaver's hands. The true genius was in the sequence. The weaver would rotate a selection of the cards forward or backward by a quarter turn, creating a new precise shed between the threads. A weft thread would be passed through, and then the process would repeat, turn after meticulous turn. This method did not just create a flat band, it produced incredibly strong, dense, and fantastically patterned trim. The patterns could be geometric zigzags, intricate runes, or even animal figures, all woven directly into the structure of the band itself. The strength of this tablet woven band was legendary. It was used for the crucial straps on a warrior's gear, the belts that held up fine tunics, and the edging that reinforced the necklines of prestigious garments. A single, well-made belt could support the weight of a sword and purse without stretching or fraying. Its beauty matched only by its resilience. The immense skill and time required meant that such adornments were far beyond the means of a common farmer. A cloak fastened with a simple bone pin was practical, but a cloak secured with a brilliantly patterned, silk-edged, tablet-woven band was a statement. It declared that the wearer commanded not just the labor of shepherds and weavers, but the rarest skill of all, the time of a master artisan. This visual hierarchy, woven and stitched into their very clothing, prepared their society for its greatest undertaking, an endeavor that would demand every scrap of textile ingenuity they possessed. The tools of the loom were so vital they often accompanied their owner into the afterlife. In Viking Age graves, archaeologists consistently find spindle whorls, weaving beaters, and shears carefully placed beside women. This was not a casual inclusion of household items. It was a deliberate statement of identity. A woman's social standing, her honor, and her family's wealth were intrinsically tied to her skill as a textile producer. The tools buried with her were a permanent record of her life's work. A simple, undecorated spindle whorl made of clay might mark the grave of a competent and respected woman from a modest farm. But a collection of fine tools told a much richer story. A set of bronze shears, far more durable and expensive than iron, alongside a weaving sword inlaid with amber, and a collection of ornately carved whalebone whorls signaled a household of great prosperity. These were not just functional objects, they were heirlooms and symbols of elite status. The woman who owned them was a master of her craft, managing a textile operation that produced the vadmal cloth that functioned as currency. Her ability to oversee the production of high-quality cloth brought tangible wealth and prestige to her entire family. Burying her with these tools ensured that her respected role, the very foundation of her identity and her family's honor, was recognized and continued in the next world. The grave goods silently proclaimed that her work was the thread that bound the family's fortune together. This deep connection between cloth and commerce leads us to the final, stunning application of this everyday craft, an innovation that would change the world. Buried within the Royal Oseberg ship, alongside two women of immense importance, lay a treasure more fragile than any jewel, fragments of a woolen tapestry. These embroidered strips, though now faded and incomplete, offer a window into the Viking mind unlike any sword or scepter. They depict a vivid procession of horse-drawn carts, warriors with spears, and a multitude of people marching with purpose. Each figure is a tiny portrait, their clothing rendered in careful detail, from the intricate patterns on their tunics to the specific draping of their cloaks. This was not random decoration, it was a deliberate narrative, likely portraying a sacred ceremony or a foundational myth. The tapestry was their storybook, woven in durable thread to outlast the memory of a single skald's poem. The clothing shown is a catalog of Viking attire, confirming the use of pleated dresses for women, tunics and trousers for men, and a variety of head coverings, all captured in the medium they knew would endure. The presence of carts in the procession is particularly telling, as actual, ornate carts were buried in the same mound, linking the woven story directly to the physical objects surrounding the deceased. This transforms the tapestry from mere wall hanging into a sacred document, a visual guide to the beliefs and rituals that govern their world. It suggests that textiles served as a primary medium for preserving cultural memory, a way to stitch their most important stories into a form that could be passed down through generations. Who were these people marching in thread? What ceremony were they engaged in? The Oseberg Tapestry asks these questions but guards its answers closely, reminding us that for the Vikings, the greatest stories were not just told, they were woven. The rhythmic work of the loom was the true heartbeat of the Viking economy. To dismiss this labor as mere women's work is to fundamentally misunderstand their entire society. The cloth produced by women was not just for keeping families warm, it was a primary form of currency. The standardized woolen fabric known as vadmal was measured by the ell and used to settle legal fines, pay taxes to a chieftain, and purchase everything from a new iron cooking pot to a share in a trading voyage. A household's wealth was not just stored in a chest of silver coins, it was stacked in bolts of cloth in the storeroom. The production of a single high-quality sail required the wool of hundreds of sheep and years of labor, from spinning the coarse yarn to weaving the massive twill panels. This sail was not merely a piece of equipment, it was an asset of immense value, the very engine that propelled a ship to trading centers in Dublin or Novgorod. A woman who managed a productive textile workshop within her longhouse was not a background figure. She was a key economic decision maker. Her ability to organize the labor, maintain the quality of the cloth, and manage the output directly influenced her family's financial standing and social influence. The burial of textile tools with women of high status was a public acknowledgement of this power. It declared that her skill in this craft was the foundation upon which her family's honor and fortune were built. Her work in the home did not remove her from the economy. It placed her at its very center, controlling the production of the one trade good that everyone, from the lowest farmhand to the highest jarl, needed to survive and thrive. This silent, steady creation of value from wool and flax challenges the very image of the Viking world, revealing an economic engine powered not by the raiding axe, but by the deft and deliberate hands of its women. A single Viking sail was a floating fortune, an investment of staggering proportions. To produce just one, a household needed the wool of around 200 sheep, representing the entire annual yield of a large flock. The sheer volume of raw fiber was only the beginning. 2 skilled women, working full-time from dawn to dusk, would require more than a year to spin that mountain of coarse wool into thread and then weave it into the massive panels of cloth. This was not a task for a single winter. It was a multi-year project that dictated the rhythm of an entire farm. The sailcloth itself was a masterpiece of textile engineering. It had to be woven in a dense, 2-2 twill, creating a fabric that was incredibly strong, yet flexible enough to catch the wind without tearing apart. The yarn was spun from the toughest outer hairs of the sheep, fibers that were naturally water-resistant and durable. Every step of the process was aimed at creating a material that could endure the brutal conditions of the North Atlantic. A sudden gale would fill the sail with a force that could shatter a weaker cloth, but this tightly woven wool could stretch and strain, holding its shape against winds that pushed the ship to its limits. Without this advanced textile technology, the iconic Viking longship would have been nothing more than a beautifully carved rowboat, forever tethered to the coastline. The legendary raids, the epic explorations, the very discovery of new worlds all hinged on this simple, profound fact. The power to cross oceans did not begin with an axe or a sword. It began with the steady, rhythmic work of a spindle and the patient, upward beat of a loom. This dense, felt-like fabric was the final ingredient in their maritime revolution. After the Vathmal cloth was woven, it underwent a transformative process called fulling. The large panels of wool were soaked in warm, alkaline water, often with the addition of a special clay known as fuller's earth. Workers would then stomp, beat, and agitate the cloth for hours. This violent treatment caused the wool fibers to swell, lock together, and shrink, matting into a thick, uniform felt. The result was a fabric that was incredibly dense, windproof, and nearly impervious to water. A fulled wool sail would not become waterlogged and heavy like ordinary cloth. Instead, it would shed seawater, remaining taut and responsive to the wind. This was the difference between a ship that wallowed in a storm and one that could slice through it. Assembling these panels into a single sail was a monumental task of its own. The seams were the critical points of failure, and Viking sailmakers approached them with the precision of modern engineers. They used a technique called overlapping, where the edges of 2 cloth panels were laid on top of each other and then sewn together with a double row of sturdy, waxed linen thread. This created a reinforced seam that distributed stress evenly, preventing a single gust from ripping the sail apart from a weak stitch. But the reinforcement did not stop there. At the most vulnerable points, where the ropes would pull and chafe, they added patches of durable leather. The edges of the sail were bound with leather strips, and the corners were massively reinforced to handle the immense strain from the heavy sheets and tack ropes. Every single component, from the fulled wool to the leather-edged corners, was designed for one purpose: to capture the wind's power without disintegrating. This was not a passive piece of cloth. It was a dynamic, highly engineered airfoil. The way it was rigged completed the system. The sail was hung from a single, heavy yardarm, and controlled by a complex set of ropes that allowed the crew to adjust its angle and shape with remarkable speed. They could pivot the entire sail to catch a following wind or tighten it into a curved, efficient wing for beating against the breeze. This textile technology gave Viking captains a tactical agility that their rivals could not match. In a naval engagement, the ability to change direction faster than your opponent was a form of weaponry as potent as any axe. The true secret of the Viking longship was not just its sleek hull, but the engineered fabric that gave it wings. A torn tunic was never the end of the line in the Viking world. At sites like the bustling trading centers of Dublin and York, archaeologists have uncovered something remarkable: not grand bolts of new cloth, but carefully sorted piles of fabric scraps. These fragments, separated by color and fiber type, were not trash waiting to be discarded. They were a raw material depot, a collection of resources ready for a second life. A faded blue scrap from an old cloak could be combined with other blues and respun into a new variegated yarn. A sturdy piece from a worn-out sail might be cut into a patch for another sail, its strength still valuable long after its first use was over. This was a deeply pragmatic, sustainable economy where nothing was wasted out of sheer necessity. When a child outgrew a woolen tunic, it was not thrown away. The garment was often taken apart, the still usable sections cut down and re-sewn into a smaller version. If the fabric was too threadbare for even that, it was unraveled. The precious yarn was saved for darning holes in other clothes, or for weaving into a new piece of cloth where it would be hidden within the weave, giving it strength without needing to show a perfect face. And when a textile reached the absolute end of its life as clothing, it found one final purpose. It became stuffing for a pillow, a rag for cleaning, or even insulation packed into the cracks of a drafty wall. This relentless cycle of reuse presents a unique challenge for us today. The textiles that survive in the archaeological record are almost always the special occasion pieces, the vibrant silks and finely woven cloaks placed in graves for the afterlife. The truly common fabrics, the ones that were patched and repatched, unraveled and respun until they literally dissolved from use, are gone forever. The most representative clothing of the average Viking man, woman, and child has simply returned to the earth, leaving behind only the ghost of its existence in those neatly sorted piles of scraps. This silent evidence of daily life forces us to look closer at the rare, intact finds, to search for the stories not of conquest, but of simple, enduring thrift. A single thread of silk found in a Viking grave unravels a map of the entire known world. In trading towns like Birka, Sweden, archaeologists have carefully lifted tiny, shimmering fragments from the dark earth, remnants of a material that could not possibly have been made locally. This silk originated thousands of miles away, in the workshops of Byzantium, or even the distant, legendary lands of China. Its presence in a cold Scandinavian grave is a puzzle that points to a globe-spanning economy. How did this luxury, so light and yet so immensely valuable, find its way north? One compelling answer lies with the Varangian Guard, the elite Norse warriors who served as personal protectors for the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople. These men, after years of service, would return home with their pay, often in the form of silk, a currency as prestigious as silver. A scrap of gold-woven Byzantine silk buried with a retired guardsman was his resume, proof of his travels and his favor with a foreign emperor. But not all silk was loot or payment. Much of it moved through vast, interconnected trade networks, passed from hand to hand through rivers of commerce that flowed from the Caspian Sea up the Russian river systems to the Baltic. A Swedish trader might never leave his home port, yet acquire a bundle of silk ribbons from a ruse merchant who had bargained with a Khazar middleman, who had in turn traded with a caravan that had traveled the Silk Road itself. Each delicate fragment, therefore, is more than just a piece of fabric. It is a frozen moment of connection, a direct physical link between a Scandinavian farmstead and the bustling markets of Baghdad or the opulent courts of Constantinople. This evidence forces us to redraw our mental map of the Viking Age, transforming it from a series of isolated raids into a complex web of global exchange, where the most powerful symbol of status was a whisper of thread from another world. Buried near the ancient temple at Old Uppsala, archaeologists have uncovered tiny clay discs that defy simple explanation. These are miniature loom weights, perfectly shaped like the heavy stones used to tension a warp-weighted loom, but they are far too small and light to serve any practical purpose. They would have been useless for weaving actual cloth, and their discovery in such a sacred place transforms them from simple objects into a profound mystery. Why were these non-functional replicas created, and why were they deliberately left at this powerful site? One compelling theory connects them directly to the goddess Freyja. As a deity of fertility, love, and Seidr magic, Freyja was also intimately linked to the art of weaving, a craft that, like magic, involved spinning raw chaos into ordered, purposeful threads. These tiny weights could have been votive offerings left for her, a symbolic gift from a weaver seeking divine favor for her work, or perhaps pleading for creativity and skill. They represent a prayer made solid, a hope that the goddess would help tension the threads of a human life as these small weights tensioned an imaginary warp. Another possibility is that they were educational tools, a Viking girl's first introduction to her life's work. A mother might have given her daughter these toy weights to practice the motions of the loom, learning the complex rhythms of shedding and beating on a small, manageable scale before she was trusted with the real, heavy tools of the trade. In this light, they are not just toys, but the first step in a sacred inheritance of knowledge. Yet the most poignant interpretation sees them as a powerful symbol of a woman's entire social and spiritual role. By depositing a miniature version of her most essential tool at the temple, a woman was making a permanent statement. She was dedicating her life's work, her contribution to her family's wealth and honor, to the gods themselves. This act wove her identity as a producer, a creator, and an economic pillar directly into the spiritual fabric of her community. The true meaning of the fairy loom weights may forever hover between these ideas, but their existence alone is a testament to a civilization where the craft of cloth was so deeply revered, it was worthy of the gods. The concept of fate as a woven cloth was central to the Viking worldview. A form of magic known as Seidr was practiced by those who could, it was believed, read and influence the threads of destiny. Practitioners, often women of great power and respect, might have used their looms not just for wool, but as instruments for seeing and shaping the future. Each lift of the warped threads to create the shed was like opening a doorway, and the passing of the weft was the act of drawing a new event into the pattern of reality. In this spiritual framework, the practical, daily act of weaving was deeply intertwined with the cosmic. The loom itself became a sacred structure, a model of the universe where the vertical warped threads represented the fixed paths of fate, and the horizontal weft was the human will and action that crossed them, creating the final, unchangeable tapestry of a life. This profound connection explains why those miniature clay loom weights were not merely toys or simple offerings. When found placed in the earth near a burial mound or carefully deposited in a bog, their context shouts of ritual. These were liminal spaces, bogs and boundaries, seen as thin places where the world of the living touched the other world. To leave a symbol of the loom, there was to actively participate in the weaving of fate itself, perhaps to ensure a safe passage for the deceased, or to seek a favorable pattern for the future from the gods who held the distaff. The discovery of similar tiny weights and even miniature weaving swords at other sacred sites across Scandinavia confirms this was a widespread and deeply held belief. The line between the weaver at her loom and the Verlva, the seeress, practicing her Seidr was likely far more blurred than we once thought. In their hands, the most mundane of tasks was charged with supernatural significance, a daily reminder that every thread spun and every row beaten was a participation in the grand, mysterious design of the world. How do we move beyond the fragments and truly understand the hands that held these tools? The answer lies not in a dusty library, but in a modern workshop where the clatter of ancient looms is heard once more. This is the world of experimental archaeology, where historians and craftspeople are rebuilding the Viking past, one thread at a time. By using only the materials and methods available 1,000 years ago, they are turning scholarly theories into tangible, physical reality. A researcher might spend months raising a flock of the same hardy northern sheep, then shear them with replica iron shears to feel the true texture of the fleece. They will painstakingly ret flax in a pond, enduring the pungent smell, just to experience the exact point when the fibers are ready to be separated. These are not quick demonstrations. They are year-long commitments to understanding a single step in a vast process. The first profound lesson learned is the sheer time investment. A modern volunteer, using a drop spindle, discovered it took over 100 hours of constant spinning just to produce enough coarse yarn for a single square meter of sailcloth. This was not a task for a quiet evening. It was a lifetime of motion. Spinning a consistent thread, one that is neither too thin and weak nor too thick and lumpy, is a skill that takes years to master. The modern spinner quickly learns to respect the effortless-looking hands of a Viking girl, whose muscle memory was built from childhood. Then comes the loom. Setting up a warp-weighted loom is a monumental task of logistics and strength. The vertical threads must be measured, spaced, and tied to dozens of heavy clay weights. The weaver then works from the bottom up, beating each weft thread upward against gravity. After just an hour, the modern experimenter's shoulders and back ache from the strain of lifting the heavy weaving sword and pressing the weft into place. This was not a delicate pastime. It was a physically demanding profession that built formidable strength. These recreations reveal the hidden intelligence in every step. The choice of a heavier whorl suddenly makes perfect sense when you feel the momentum it gives the spindle. The diagonal structure of a twill weave reveals its genius when you see how the finished cloth stretches and moves. Through this painstaking work, the silent artifacts in museum cases begin to speak. A simple bone needle is no longer just an object, but an extension of a skilled hand, and a clay loom weight becomes a counterweight to a lifetime of labor. This hands-on research confirms what the fragments alone could never fully tell us, that Viking textile production was a pinnacle of human ingenuity, a symphony of coordinated effort where every thread was a note in a song of survival and ambition. The law itself was measured out in ells of cloth. In the cold assembly fields of Iceland, the early legal code known as the Greggas did not speak solely of weapons or land, but of the precise dimensions and quality of woven wool. This was the law of the Vadmal, the standardized cloth that functioned as the very lifeblood of the economy. The legal texts are astonishingly specific, defining the exact width, length, and thread count required for a piece of cloth to be considered legal tender. It had to be 2 ells wide, a measure roughly the span of a man's arm from elbow to fingertip, and its quality was judged by how many threads you could count in a given space. A loosely woven, shoddy piece was worth less than a dense, tightly beaten one. This was not a suggestion, it was a binding regulation, a way to ensure that when a debt was paid or a fine was settled, everyone agreed on the value of the currency being exchanged. Imagine a farmer found guilty of a minor offense. His punishment might not be a silver coin, but a mandate to produce 6 ells of 2 ell wide vadmal, cloth that met the exacting standards of the law. This cloth was used to pay things called thing tax, a contribution to the National Assembly, and it was the standard measure for wergild, the blood price paid to a family to settle a killing and prevent a feud. A man's life, in the eyes of the law, had a value that could be measured in meters of wool. This legal codification reveals a society where textile production was not a domestic side project, but a central pillar of civic order. The Greggas legally enshrined the work of women as the foundation of commerce and justice. It meant that the most powerful chieftain and the most humble free farmer both participated in an economy whose most reliable currency was not minted in a king's hall, but created in the home, on the loom, by the hands that guided the weft. This system gave the producers of cloth, overwhelmingly women, an indirect but undeniable form of economic power. Their skill directly influenced their families' ability to navigate the legal world, to pay debts, and to maintain social standing. The law was quite literally woven from the same threads as their clothing, a tangible link between the daily rhythm of the loom and the abstract concepts of justice and social contract. How did this deeply ingrained, legally defined value system translate when Vikings encountered cultures with entirely different traditions of wealth and power? The waterlogged soil of Heithabu holds whispers of cloth in a way dry earth never could. In this major Viking trading town, the oxygen-poor environment acted as a perfect preservative, creating a textile time capsule of staggering diversity. Here, archaeologists have not just found a few charred fragments, but entire swaths of fabric, their colors and weaves frozen in time. The range is breathtaking. Coarse, sturdy wools woven in simple tabby for the sacks that carried grain sit alongside the fine, tutu twill of a sailor's jacket, its fabric still dense and wind-resistant after 1,000 years. There are delicate linen undergarments, their threads spun to a fineness that speaks of a wealthy wearer, and there are piles of fabric scraps, sorted by color and quality, ready to be reused in the bustling town's economy. But the most telling finds are the tools. A single excavation might yield dozens of differently weighted spindle whorls, from heavy stone ones for spinning sail yarn to tiny, ornate bone ones for delicate silk thread. There are weaving tablets for creating intricate trim, needles for nail binding, and shears of all sizes. This is not the inventory of a single household, but the toolkit of an entire urban industry. Heithabu reveals a society where textile work was specialized and commercialized. A woman living here might not have spun her own thread from her own sheep, but instead purchased pre-dyed yarn from a market stall to weave into cloth for sale, her loom weights tapping in rhythm with her neighbors in a symphony of urban production. And among the local wools and linens lie the true markers of Heithabu's global connections, shimmering threads of silk and even fragments of cloth woven with gold. This was not a remote outpost, but a cosmopolitan hub where a trader from the north could acquire a ribbon of Byzantine silk to bring home, leaving behind a piece of his silver in exchange. The layers of cloth at Heithabu are like the layers of the town itself, a story of local skill and far-reaching dreams, preserved in the silent, damp earth. The beauty of the finished cloth came at a deep physical cost. Skeletal remains of Viking women tell a story written in bone, a narrative of lifelong labor that archaeology is only now beginning to read. The signs are unmistakable and sobering. Advanced osteoarthritis is frequently found in the lower spine, hips, and knees, a direct result of the hours spent standing at the massive warp-weighted loom, leaning forward to beat the weft threads upward against gravity. Their fingers and thumbs show joint degeneration from the constant, repetitive motions of spinning, twisting fiber into miles of thread year after year. This was not a gentle hobby, but a profession that sculpted the body through strain, leaving behind a permanent record of pain and endurance. Perhaps the most intimate and startling evidence is found not in the joints, but in the teeth. On the front teeth of many female skeletons, archaeologists have identified a distinct pattern of wear, a grooved polishing not seen in male remains of the same age. This is the mark of the thread smoother. As a woman spun her flax or wool into yarn, she would frequently draw the fibers across her incisors to wet them with saliva, smoothing out any irregularities and creating a stronger, more consistent thread. Every single piece of perfect, uniform yarn that went into a sail or a tunic required this small, repeated gesture. Over a lifetime, this act literally wore grooves into the enamel, etching the very craft of textile production onto her body. This skeletal evidence forces us to see beyond the vibrant colors and intricate patterns. It adds a deeply human, often painful dimension to our understanding of this society. The economic power and social standing a woman earned were paid for with the gradual, cumulative toll on her own frame. Her value was woven not just from wool, but from her own physical substance. This reality of daily discomfort and long-term debilitation stands in stark contrast to the spiritual power these same women were believed to command, a power that also flowed from the loom and the thread. Their thread did not break with the longships. The legacy of Viking textile techniques wove itself directly into the fabric of later European history, nowhere more famously than in the Bayeux Tapestry. This monumental embroidery, telling the story of the Norman conquest of England, was stitched by Anglo-Saxon hands, yet it exists in a world fundamentally shaped by generations of Viking settlement and influence across the British Isles. The tapestry itself is a technical marvel of the very tablet weaving and intricate needlework perfected in the Norse world. Its borders are alive with the same beasts and geometric patterns found on Viking Age trims, and the vivid woad blues and madder reds staining the woolen threads are a direct inheritance from the dyer's pots of Scandinavia. This was not mere imitation, it was the evolution of a shared textile language, proving that the most enduring Viking conquest was not of land, but of craft. Back in the Scandinavian homelands, the old ways persisted for centuries in folk traditions. The resilient craft of nail binding never truly disappeared. It was passed down from mother to daughter through the generations, producing the warm, durable mittens and socks that remained essential for surviving northern winters. A quiet, unbroken thread connecting the Viking Age to the modern day. This ancient knowledge is now experiencing a dramatic revival. Modern fashion designers and textile artists are looking back to these methods not as historical curiosities, but as sources of profound inspiration. They see in the Vikings a masterclass in sustainability, a zero-waste ethos where every scrap of fiber was valued and every garment was built to last a lifetime. The dense, fulled wool they perfected is now sought after for its natural weatherproof qualities, a sustainable alternative to synthetic fabrics. The geometric purity of a diamond, twill pattern might appear on a contemporary runway, its ancient beauty translated into modern luxury. And in homes and workshops around the world, a new generation is picking up drop spindles and learning the rhythmic art of nail binding, finding in these ancient rhythms a connection to a slower, more intentional way of creating. The true legacy of the Viking weaver is not frozen in a museum case. It lives on in every handcrafted piece that values strength, beauty, and a deep, respectful connection to the materials of the earth. The true fabric of the Viking Age was not wool or linen, but the intricate weave of connections these textiles created. Every thread linked a farm to a fjord, a loom to a longship, a woman's hands to the fate of her entire community. This was a civilization built on the profound understanding that survival, wealth, and even spiritual power were spun from the same simple fibers. Their identity was not forged by the sword alone, but equally by the steady rhythm of the spindle whorl and the patient, upward beat of the weaving sword. They were master ecologists who understood their landscape down to the layered coat of a single sheep. They were sophisticated chemists who could brew color from leaves and roots. They were global economists who used standardized cloth as currency and acquired silk from continents away. The legacy they left behind is a challenge to our modern imagination. The next time the image of a Viking ship appears in your mind, listen for the quieter sounds beneath the roar of the waves. Hear the rhythmic hum of the drop spindle in a firelit room. Listen for the soft clatter of clay loom weights, a sound that meant commerce and comfort, warmth and wealth. These were the sounds that truly built their world, a world stitched together not by conquest, but by cloth. So what part of their textile world captures your imagination the most? Was it the incredible engineering of the sailcloth, a fabric so resilient it could endure the North Atlantic's fury? Or perhaps the clever, unbreakable loops of nail binding, creating socks that defied time and wear? Maybe it was the vibrant alchemy of their dyes, pulling brilliant blues and regal purples from simple plants and rocks. I am genuinely curious to hear which thread of this story resonated with you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the fabric of the Viking Age, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell. Your support helps us continue weaving these tales from the past. Thank you for watching.